David Young, Executive Director of the Delaware Historical Society, to say a few words of welcome. We can kind of roll from there.
Thank you, Brent and Grum, and I really appreciate the opportunity to welcome you to what's become an annual event, the Baetjer Fellows presentations in August. And in normal times, we would have the opportunity to meet together and really put the fellows on center stage at the dais in the Copeland room. And of course, these are not normal times. And so I'm very sorry that we can't all be together and experience the opportunity we have here with seeing how good the stewardship of historical resources are in the hands of the next generation, like the Baetjer Fellows.
Sorry, David, by my mistake, we lost your last few words. Apologies.
Oh, pardon me. Well, whatever they were sage, but will be nothing in comparison to those of the fellows. I want to thank, this is the third year of the program, and it wouldn't be possible without the generosity of Michelle Shepard and the Shepard family. But as the program has gone in 3 years, in memory, or in honor of Harry Baetjer, many of his family members have also joined in very generous support, and it's good to see some of them here and joining in. So the disadvantage of not being together to experience this in the Copeland room, where we could really put the fellows under the spotlight, is that we're able to have more people join in, including family members of the fellows, alumni from the program before, former fellows, so to speak. And so in some ways, the benefit is gained by having a little bit more opportunity to see familiar faces, including many board members of the Delaware Historical Society and supporters of the Mitchell Center for African American Heritage, as well as former board members and program partners throughout the state. I'm seeing many familiar names. So I want to thank everyone for joining us in what has become a special event. I also want to thank the staff of the Delaware Historical Society that's been so helpful to the fellows. You know, young people have had a rough go of it during this pandemic. And with sports and concerts and prom and graduations all gone by the wayside or found to have a new format in 2020. We're sorry about that, but we've also appreciated the resilience of these young people. They become somewhat callous to the adaptations that they have to make and have had to make and will have to make, unfortunately, because there's no end in sight. But that doesn't mean that they can't engage with the scholars and the staff of the Historical Society. And they've done so under the direction of Mr. Brenton Grom and in association with Dr. Stephanie Lampkin and Ms. Rebecca Fay and Ms. Lee Reifenberg and many others of the staff, Bill Robinson, Sari Nessum, Becca Duffy, Kobe Baker, and many, many others. And I really appreciate all the help that the entire staff of the Delaware Historical Society has done. I also want to remind folks that we have been doing a lot of virtual programs, and we have one coming up on August 20th at 6 p.m. with Jesse Erickson talking about Alice Dunbar Nelson and the important work of her leadership in Delaware and throughout the region. So check out our website, dehistory.org. We had 156 people join a program on Monday about African American suffragists, and they came from all over the country. So keep an eye out. We're able to engage digitally, and that's also an opportunity we didn't know that we could pivot to so readily. And so I'm really grateful for all the effort Delaware Historical Society wide to bring programs like this to you. But this is a very special one. Young people who've engaged in the work of bringing life to history, whether it's through the science of conservation or the community engagement or the design of our own efforts to engage people digitally on social media, on our websites. I think you're going to see some really interesting and provocative programs, presentations from the fellows. And without further ado, once again, thank you to our generous donors and to the entire staff that's worked with some very fine fellows. I wish we could all be there to high-five you in person, but we look forward to seeing your work. Over to you, Brenton Grom, the director of the Baetjer Fellows program.
Thanks very much for those words, David. And thank you everyone for being willing to join us virtually. The pandemic lockdown hit literally a week before the application deadline for this program. But I have to say, I don't think that anyone at DHS seriously ever considered canceling the program this year. We always knew that we would find a way to adapt, the interview process and figure out how to make as much of the experience virtual as was necessary. And that's really typical of the Delaware Historical Society staff. We've been, as a group, I think, as productive as ever. And, there's a little bit of that comes through in the work of the fellows as well. And to be honest, we wouldn't have missed working with these students for anything. The applicant pool this year was our largest and the most diverse that we've had to date. There were students from Delaware, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, from as far away as south of Dover, and who were willing to make the drive if necessary, if we were working on site. So we didn't want to put the brakes on the momentum, and we're really glad that we didn't. Which brings us here tonight. This marks, as David mentioned, 3 full years of the Harry N. Baetjer III Junior Fellows Program. And this virtual format really isn't so bad when you consider that it allows people to pop in from anywhere and everywhere. And that includes some alums of the program that I'm seeing popping up here. And I'd love actually to give a shout out if you wouldn't mind just unmuting yourselves for a second and telling us what your program year was and where you're going to be this fall, whether you're still in high school or off to college. I see Tommy Kinservik.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
So I was in the program last year, 2019, and I'm heading off to Yale University in the fall to major in history. So yeah.
Very cool. I promised poor Jesse Roy we wouldn't make him talk because this guy had his wisdom teeth taken out earlier today and still came to this program. But Jesse, I think, tell me if I'm wrong, you're also headed to Yale, right?
Yeah, I'm also planning to major in history. My mouth's working again, so I can kind of move I can still talk. But I'm really excited to hear your presentations today. I'm so glad that you were able to meet in person and research in person with all the rewards that come with that. I am planning to major in history, and I have to say this program helped me find my way a lot in my interests, in my skills, and I hope you gained as much from it. So thanks again.
Thanks for being here. I see Evan Seco.
Hi, I'm Evan. I was in the program in 2018, I believe, and I'm off to University of Delaware to do honors exercise science for my major. And even though it's not history, I do think, like Jesse, this program was something that being here tonight and seeing it kind of makes me feel almost nostalgic because it was something super cool and special. And I'm glad that this year you guys still had the chance to participate in it despite the circumstances. So that's awesome to get to see tonight.
Nice to see you, Evan. I see another honors college person, Amy Hall.
Yeah, hi, I'm Amy. I was a fellow in 2019 and I'm off to Penn State and I'm studying public relations.
Which is very apt. Was the nature of her Baetjer program work, and she's stayed in the loop. She comes and does work for us at the Reed House from time to time. So she's still in the family. Who else am I? Is there anybody? Oh, Whitney Greenwich Cassidy.
Hi, everybody. My name is Whitney. I was in the program in 2018, and I graduated from Ursuline Academy this year, and I'm headed to Swarthmore College in the fall to possibly major in Black Studies. And I'm just really happy to be here. I'm glad that everybody was able to kind of get on, and this program was amazing. So I'm excited to see everything you guys have.
Cool. It's so great to see you. Is there anybody I'm missing here? Just jump in and say hello if I'm missing any other alums. Okay, well, congrats to all of you. It's really great to see you. Thanks for sticking with us. And pardon me while I shuffle my windows here. I just want to reiterate a couple of words of recognition and thanks I'd love to, again, thank Lee Reifenberg, Rebecca Fay, and Stephanie Lampkin, who all mentored individual fellows projects this year, and they also joined in some of our seminar discussions, as did David. And in spite of the whole work from home situation, there were actually several other staff members who worked with fellows in various departments. So I want to point out Bill Robinson from the library, Siri Nessim in education, Kobe Baker in the Mitchell Center, and Becca Duffy and Tara Hayward from the Reed House, as well as Christine Grott and Alex Dittman, who gave us a lot of administrative support to keep everything from getting tangled up. So finally, I want to reiterate David's words of gratitude to two people who really continue to make this program possible. One of them being Michelle Shepard, who with her husband David has been supporting us from the beginning, and of course Harry Baetjer, who, I think people have stopped counting, Harry, how many lives you have touched and how many lives you touched in your 47 years at the Tower Hill School. But I don't think Harry has slowed down at all. And we're really grateful for that, because besides lending us his name, he also has been a wonderful mentor to me and those of us running the program. And he's really helped us, with the onerous task of sorting through applicants and, conducting interviews every year, because we always have horribly difficult choices to make. There's so many talented folks out in our community who apply to the program. So thank you, Harry, and thank you, Michelle. I want to say that one of the selling points of this program is that you get to have senior staff members as your primary mentors. And that doesn't happen necessarily in larger institutions. But you also get to really sink your teeth into real projects with a sense of ownership. And I think that's been important to past fellows, and hopefully this cohort as well. Another benefit is the chance to be in a professional environment right at the center of the action. And to tell you the truth, I think that's what I've fretted about the most this summer in trying to figure out how we go virtual with this. How do we capture that kind of learning and that kind of day-to-day fun that you get to have when we're in a remote landscape? And we haven't had, the afternoon clock in the Reed House offices, but we've gotten to know each other on Zoom and Slack and Microsoft Teams, and these guys have really led the way in understanding and imagining how we use technologies in new ways to get us through a sticky situation. There are other intangibles too to this experience that have actually carried through in the virtual environment. Stuff like, gosh, when do I knock on my boss's door? And when do I find, that I can have a conversation with somebody else on the staff to work through this question? Well, now it's a world of, gosh, when do we set up a video meeting? Is it okay to text on a Saturday? What's the rest of the digital etiquette? So my hope is that we've all learned something from each other too about navigating the workplace, and that'll hopefully leave all the fellows in a stronger position as they head off to college and get into professional lives of their own. They have all been so resilient and patient, and I have watched everyone grow so much over the course of this summer, and I think that my colleagues agree with me on that. It's really been heartening, and even as these months have dragged all of us down, there's been a real buoyancy here. So they've brought a lot to our organization in that way. Before I hand off the rest of the evening to all of these guys, I want to take a moment to reflect on the seminar component of this program, which is something we added last year and expanded this year at the request of last year's cohort, because I think it points us towards some pretty significant silver linings in these really challenging times. To get their feet wet, all the fellows start out by reading a piece from Jennifer Roberts, who's an art historian at Harvard. And it's about what she calls the power of patience. She makes her students go from time to time over to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston and look at this particular Copley painting for 3 full hours before they're allowed to actually start writing their assignment about it. And it's a kind of enforced slowing down in a way that is not totally unlike the way that, that the pandemic and quarantine have, and being separated have forced us to slow down. And it's been frustrating, but we've also, I think, benefited from the chance and the imperative to really reflect on what it is we're doing and what it is we prioritize. And to that end, it occurred to me this morning that all of the section headings on our seminar syllabus are about active thinking in some way, considering historical meaning. It's a day when we think about what aspects of the past seem like they're knowable to us and which ones seem totally foreign. And whether we can trust our depth perception at all, it really gets complicated fast. And we wonder whether things are really what they seem. That's what some of the practice of history is about. There's another day that we call Rethinking the Historical Society. And we jump into recent journalism. We take deep, thoughtful dives into the world that we live in this moment and think about how it's wired. And then we go outside of the conventional museum studies and public history, and we tap into conversations from the fashion world or discussions about the algorithms on TikTok and Instagram, or questions about capitalism and who is in control of cultural resources. And it gets deep really fast, and these guys are always up to the task. We think about how the physical assets that we have as a historical society, our collections, our buildings, how these things could possibly be deployed in new responsive ways in the environment that we're in, ways that we wouldn't have imagined 10 years ago or 50 years ago or 100 years ago. And we also read some challenging theoretical texts that help us think about what we call decolonizing the historical society, looking for places where the perspectives of certain people who maybe have benefited from being white or being affluent, or things they hadn't thought about before, how those perspectives maybe have crowded out perspectives of others. So we look for ways that we can open the doors to find all of the experiences and perspectives and identities that could possibly relate to the work that we do and the assets we have. So all of this is to bring us back to where we started, which is the question of how do you adapt a program like this for for these weird and troubling times. And the answer I think we've found is not just that you find a way to do virtually exactly what you were doing before. It's an opportunity to step back and think about the nature of what we have and how it could connect with the world we live in. And surprisingly, sometimes it doesn't translate into the traditional intern projects that you would expect. It's not just, well, go and catalog these things or, make an exhibition. It becomes more creative in ways you'll learn from some of these projects, like building a website or developing an Instagram presence for National History Day, or Ben Greenberg was being the go-between between a researcher in Virginia and some collections that exist in Delaware. So all of this has given us new opportunities to think and recalibrate. And I hope that ethos that's coming out of this program is actually something that has a larger presence for our organization than just some interns getting some work done for us. I think it's given us all an opportunity to engage in new and interesting ways. And we're really grateful to all the fellows for that experience. So with that having been said, you'll be delighted, I'm sure, and much more delighted than hearing me talk, to hear a little bit from each of them about their projects. And we're going to start with Molly Shapiro.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to start. Ran into a quick problem. Can't share my screen.
Oops. Okay, we can fix that pretty easily. should be good now. Try it again.
Yeah, there we go. All right. Okay, can everyone see that? It's loading. Is that good? Is it working?
Looks good, Molly.
All right. Good evening. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Molly Shapiro, and I am one of the 6 junior fellows for 2020. My presentation today is about bringing the past into the present, through the reconstruction of the Reed House website. So my project for my fellowship was to recreate the Reed House and Gardens website, which was previously on Adobe Portfolio on a WordPress platform. I'm sure some of you are asking, why the switch? Well, the first reason was purely technical. While the old website was functional, it existed on a platform that was difficult to maintain and not as popular as WordPress. We all know popularity doesn't always matter, but in this case, a more widespread platform is more likely to have regular updates to all of its components, which reduces the security risks and makes it easier to maintain. If the theme or any of the plugins are outdated, that provides an easy backdoor into the site and can compromise the organization's digital security. But the second reason was a little more complex. Even though the current DHS site is in the process of being revamped, staff saw value in the Reed House having its own site. Yes, it's an integral part of DHS, but at the same time, it's tied to a separate location and community with a particular history and aesthetic. An individual website allows the unique and important history of design at the Reed House to shine through in every page without having to worry about competing with the aesthetic of the main DHS website. This allows the new Reed House site to tell the story of the Reed House, not just through content, but through composition as well. These visual cues an invitation to connect with them in their own way. By using digital design elements similar to those of a contemporary interior designer or in one of the many lifestyle magazines where the Reed House has been featured, the new site marries the history of the Reed House with the modern perspectives of the audience viewing it. So what needed to be done to complete this project? The first step was to create a list of site settings from the previous website. We wanted to maintain the aesthetic of the original site, as well as retain all of the content. So we needed a list that we could refer to when building the new website. The second step was to research, then decide on themes and hosting options for WordPress sites. We were able to find a theme that allowed us to very nearly replicate the old site with some design changes along the way, while keeping the new site clean and cohesive, and a hosting company that would be cost-effective for the society while providing a reliable hosting platform. The final step was to build the site. But why is having a refined website so necessary for the Reed House? In our modern world, the importance of a digital presence is unrivaled. Businesses and organizations have been forced to move their operations almost completely online to stay afloat. Especially in today's era of uncertainty, technology has become our bridge between ourselves and others. It's how we communicate, how we stay up to date, and even how we discover organizations like the Delaware Historical Society. Having an easily manageable and usable website increases an organization's ability to harness the volatility of modern culture to their benefit. Not everyone can drive to the Reed House to get more information about their school programs, but almost anyone can find their website and access it. With a new website, the Reed House can draw in new audiences from digital platforms. In an article discussing the term "the big flat now" as a name for the modern media phenomenon, Jack Self describes the volatility of modern culture in the line, "When creativity attracts attention, it produces a temporary center. This is a fleeting concentration of time, space, and money." We discussed this concept during one of our seminars, and during that meeting, I imagined it as one of those diagrams of how much a black hole weighs. You have a grid, then in the center, that grid dips down towards the aforementioned temporary center, drawing in attention like a black hole at work. For local groups like the Society, harnessing this temporary center, this black hole of attention, is the key to gaining recognition. But to be able to make a dent in the sprawling landscape of the big flat now, a significant digital presence is crucial. These days, it's both much easier and much harder to make an impact in the world of modern media. On one hand, anything can go viral. There's no requirement for what can be pushed to the front of the crowd of content on the internet. Everything from casual tweets to elaborate threads can go viral with no warning. There's no algorithm or equation that can explain the erratic movements of modern culture. So theoretically, anyone can find themselves in the center of the global focus. On the other hand, however, there's so much content on the internet to wade through that standing out in the midst of it all is a challenge all its own. That is part of the reason why a visually appealing and well-functioning website is pivotal. It's the first impression of an organization for potential audiences. It can decide whether or not the viewer will investigate the organization further or engage with the site past the homepage. If the viewer finds a broken link or a garish color scheme, they are far less likely to consider interacting with that organization. But if the website is aesthetically pleasing and works how it's supposed to, the viewer will feel far more compelled to continue scrolling through. Now, I know at this point I would be thinking, but what did you gain from this experience? Well, this project gave me the professional space to create my first full website. Before this fellowship, I had only ever worked on bits and pieces of a variety of sites. But with this project, I was able to draw on my entire skill set and learn some new things to create the new Reed House and Gardens website. I could combine my love of technology and my love of history to create something new that will hopefully serve the Delaware Historical Society and the Reed House well. I was also able to enjoy in-depth discussions with like-minded individuals about topics that I had never considered before, but found fascinating. And finally, to finish off my presentation, I want to give everyone a preview of the new Reed House and Gardens website. As you can see, you start off with a splash page, which draws you into the website, makes you want to see more. And we journey to the homepage. You can see buttons to the variety of other pages on the site. You can see a little taste of the Reed House and Gardens Instagram page. And if you wish, you can join the email list. This site continues onto the Our Story page, which tells the story of the Reed House through the years. the fees and hours page, which gives you information about the workings of the Reed House, if you're interested, and even gives you information if you're looking to take a tour. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Molly. This is fantastic. And I see all these applause coming from all sides. Different kind of audience environment, audience experience from usual. Fantastic work, and we will, now that everyone is in our loop, you'll probably hear something official about the launch of the website as soon as we work out the last few bugs here and there. So we are going to have a brief panel discussion at the end of all of the presentations. So if you have questions that are on your mind, feel free to reserve them for then, and then perhaps we can type them into the chat, and we can get a little bit of conversation going with all of the fellows as a group. Excellent. All right. On to our next presenter. And I have lost track of things. So it is Oluwaseun Ogundimu from MOT Charter School, who's been working with the Mitchell Center for African American Heritage. Sean, you want to take it away?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Let me screen share. Okay. Is this good? Is it good?
Yeah, we can see it.
So my name is Sean Ogundimu, or Oluwaseun Ogundimu, and in this presentation, I'll be going through my journey throughout my internship with the subsect of the overall DHS, which is the Mitchell Center for African American Heritage. And through this, I'll be showing you the Historical Society in a new perspective. Thank you. So first, I'll talk about my task for the MCAAH. So I had to develop family activities for 2 holidays. One was statewide, one was nationwide. And the MLK Day was my nationwide holiday, and the August Quarterly was my statewide holiday. Then I'll talk about my main highlights from my readings and the takeaways that I got from those readings through the seminars. And then finally, I'll tell you how both my task and both the readings that I read made me develop a new perspective for the DHS. So first I'll be talking about the task. So my task was to make in the end two itineraries that were based off of nationwide holidays that celebrated African American heritage. So in doing this, I made historical research presentations about the holidays. I made one to two family program activities per holiday, and then I made 2 itineraries about each holiday. And these itineraries were pretty much listing the different events that would go on in these programs when the MCAAH actually hosted these events. And then I would pretty much write how each event would go and the directions for how like the different activities would be actually executed. So the first holiday was that I chose, the nationwide holiday was the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Day. So MLK was a civil rights activist, leader, and symbol. He was incredibly influential in the civil rights movement. He was very rebellious but ambitious. I remember that he graduated as valedictorian of Morehouse College, and he also got a PhD by the age of 25. But at the same time, he had a lot of Christian ideals, but he rebelled from those ideals as he had an affair, and he also stuck to drinking alcohol. So he kind of had both perspectives of life and had to get over some boundaries. He led the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955, which was promoting the desegregation of buses in Montgomery. And then he also delivered the iconic I Have a Dream speech And this speech is always referenced in any civil rights manner that's being used today and even throughout history. So the statewide holiday that I chose to be based off of was the August Quarterly Festival. And this festival is in the Harriet Tubman riverfront in downtown Wilmington. And this holiday is actually, I really am influenced by this holiday because I'm very impacted by gospel. And this holiday is celebrating the Black church and its influence that it had in African American heritage, African American culture, and even advocacy. It was founded by Peter Spencer in 1814. And Peter Spencer actually, which is very interesting, he made the first Black denomination in the USA. And that was made actually right in Wilmington. And the church that he founded was the Union Church of Africans. He made this church because a lot of the white-based churches were segregated, and many African Americans were taken from the administrative roles of the churches. So he developed his own church and made the August Quarterly that kind of celebrated the new style of gospel that African Americans brought, and through their own expression. So the family activities that I chose for these holidays were, for MLK Day, I chose the Heart of Cards game, which is pretty much a game where one person gets a certain card, and there's going to be a word on the card, and it's going to be from the civil rights. So it could say equality, for example, and they would have to talk about how that word affected them in their own lives. And then I also chose to do the I Have a Dream game, which is pretty much just a memorization game of the I Have a Dream speech. And whoever can memorize the most is going to win kind of like a little prize or an award. And then same type of competition with the civil rights poster, where the guests are going to be making a poster. And the winner who has the best poster is going to be voted upon, and the winner is going to be declared. For the August Quarterly Festival, I used the What Do We Have in Common game as the icebreaker or the introduction. And in this game, we're putting guests in groups of 3, and these groups are going to be diverse, and the groups have to find commonalities between them in a set amount of time. The point of this game is to show that diverse sets of people can have a lot of things in common with each other, and they can relate to a lot of topics. And then I'm also going to do the Make Your Own Call and Response game. And this game is, the call and response style in gospel is it's a traditional method that gospel employs when it was first being introduced. And it's something that is heavily used in African American gospel music. And that's why I want the guests to get a feel of what the expression felt like back in that time. So they're going to be able to make their own call and response game with lyrics that either relate to slavery, the civil rights, or anything that impacted them in their lives. So now I'll be talking about the readings and takeaways. This is the various readings that we did with the seminar. I'll be highlighting 2 sources. One, the second source that I'll be highlighting is actually a picture. The first one is an actual article. And these sources we had a lot of discussions about, and I think these ones impacted me most when finding a new perspective for the DHS. So the first is What Will Peace Among the Whites Bring by Professor Blight. And so Blight is pretty much posing a question that Frederick Douglass asked, saying Douglass implied that in history, when whites were at war, and implying the Civil War, African Americans benefited. So he's asking what will happen when whites are at peace. And Blight analyzes this question through 2 mediums. He uses the loss of memory of slavery within African American communities, using Alexander Crummell and Frederick Douglass as prime examples, and the loss of memory of slavery within Caucasians, using the Gettysburg Reunion in 1913 as the prime example. So my analysis of this was Douglass has a strong relation to the strange past. In this sense, Douglass grew up as a slave, and he got an education untraditionally, so he cannot forget the impact that slavery had on his life. while someone like Alexander Crummell didn't have the same past with slavery that Douglass had. So he was able to forget the impact that slavery actually brought. And that led to my own thinking that we cannot forget the past indiscretions nor ignore its existence. But at the same time, we should not allow the past to dictate our future. This is pretty much saying that I agree with Douglass that we should remember what slavery was. We should remember the good and the bad from history, but we shouldn't let that suddenly push us back from where we could go currently. So the Gettysburg Reunion in 1913 was also something that Blight mentioned, and he was saying that when whites were at peace, which was, this celebration was on a massive scale. It was in Pennsylvania, and it had multiple politicians come, and so much money was spent into this reunion. And they were talking about how a lot of them were past slavery, and they were reuniting on pretty much the fact that they've all gotten better. But at the same time, we know that things like segregations, lynchings, and protests were occurring on a nationwide spectrum. So Blight uses this to imply that when whites are at peace, African Americans don't benefit. My analysis of this is that he's actually wrong. I feel like anyone is going to be harmed when we solely focus on the strange and or familiar past. So we can't just look at history in one aspect, because when you look at it in one aspect, you're being one-sided and you only see one side of the actual situation. And in that case, the stuff that you're going to be missing can be things that can actually impact other people, and you only focusing on something else can actually harm another group of people, or even yourself, your community, etc. This actually wasn't even one of the sources we had to look at in our seminars, but Dr. Lampkin, my supervisor, mentioned this memorial, and it really had me thinking, simply because it puts the strange and the familiar past right in your face, and you can see it puts the strange and the familiar past in a way that you can't separate it at all. You can't solely focus on one part, and you can see how Lincoln did a great deed freeing African Americans from slavery, and we all know that, but we also know that his ideals of race were not nearly at the same level as where we are today. And we rarely focus on that strange past aspect, and because of this, we can't really comprehend pictures like this, and it gets a lot of controversy. So this is just showing the dangers of focusing on one side of history. So how does this all tie into the new perspective and the familiar past? So us constantly separating the stranger and the familiar past rather than using them together to make a better solution for the future. Second, the fact that the DHS is a little bit hidden from the public view. I like how my other fellow intern, Molly, she was editing the website, and things like that is really going to put the DHS back into the public view and back into the public spectrum. And I feel like we need to do more, we need to do actions like that that are very strategic, that help to make sure that the information is getting put out to all the communities, which leads to my second point, community engagement. Every community should be engaged with their own history, and we should work with the DHS. And that's a two-way street. So some examples of this was the August Quarterly history. Again, this history it astonished me. It really did astonish me, and I was astonished that all of that history was actually in Delaware, because when your first thought about Delaware is that there really isn't anything that happened, but when you really look into the history, there's so much things that actually happened, and also the role of the Black church within the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King, he was a pastor, his father was a pastor, he grew up with Christian ideals, and that developed into a lot of his political beliefs, a lot of his political strategies, and I think that we should also spend more time kind of analyzing how those two play together. So a new perspective is we should be innovative within the big flat now, which Molly also brought up. And I think that that's just really being on top of the internet, the trends, and what's relevant. We should reveal both types of historical viewpoints, the strange and the familiar past, put them together and be neutral with the information that you're bringing out, be honest. We should also inform, educate, and interact with various types of communities to make sure that everybody is getting the proper amount of information and there's no disparities being created. And then also, we should support new ethical ideologies without forgetting past success and indiscretions. Simply using the information that we have and the facts that we know, the good and the bad, we should use that information and put it out so that we are supporting the new and better thinking that we're constantly developing as a society together. We should be progressive in that sense. So what exactly can we do? First, post ideas that are relevant to popular topics within the Big Flat now. For example, with the Ahmaud Arbery incident, a lot of African American communities it would be very relevant if they saw a lot of information that related to their history or different things that happened throughout history related to African American heritage, the culture, even in advocacy. So I feel like optimizing on those moments where people want to really see history and see facts that they never knew was out there, that would be definitely a strong way where the DHS could become relevant within the Big Flat now. Also, we should display a diverse set of facts as standard. Every community should understand the history of every other community around us so that we all know where everybody's coming from and we can all have a diverse mindset. And then finally, we should engage with the community in both education and consenting to use their historical property. Not only should the communities be learning the historical facts that are coming out of the DHS, but also we should only use their information with their consent. There should be we shouldn't be forcing any communities or any person to be giving out certain information if they're not comfortable with doing as such. So in conclusion, when I first came into this internship, my perspective of the historical of the DHS was pretty one-sided. I thought that history was just learning historical facts, but through this internship, I realized so much about actually having a DHS. And I realized so much about the strong impact the DHS has. The fact that we're differentiating things from the strange and the familiar past. We're showing so much we're showing so much information, and I'm seeing the strong passion in all the faculty, all of the staff, all of the supervisors, and even all the other interns. This internship really showed me that the DHS is really something that a lot of people take a lot of pride from, and I've also taken pride from. It's really something that's truly amazing, and I really couldn't see that as an outsider. But coming into this internship was very impactful in that sense, so I'm very, very happy that I got to see the DHS in a completely new, revitalized perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean, for that very articulate meditation on theory and practice. And I couldn't agree more with you, as I'm sure everybody is with me on this, about your sentiments about the society and its prospects. And I think it's fantastic to be able to highlight all of that together. Marvelous. All right. Well, let's move along to Sanjay Long, who is going to be a senior at Archmere Academy and was doing work for and at the Reed House. So I'll let you introduce yourself further, Sanjay.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sanjay Long, and hold on, let me just try to get this presentation up. There we go. Yeah, I worked at the Reed House this summer, mostly in the gardens. And I'm just going to briefly go over, I had kind of two little projects this summer. So I'm just going to briefly go over those and then discuss a little bit about the ideas that we talked about in seminar and apply them to the Reed House and a little bit of what I've been doing. So the first part of my project was restoring the historical sidewalks at the Reed House. There were some roots that were growing underneath the bricks, pushing them up, which create tripping hazards, could be dangerous for visitors. And the second part was doing plant research. So we identified some of the species that we saw in older pictures from the late 1800s and early 1900s at the Reed House Gardens. So I was just researching to find the history of some of these plants, where they originated from, how they got to America, historical maintenance techniques, and kind of compare them to modern maintenance techniques, and a little bit about the historical prices of these plants at the time. So just going a little bit more in depth in the sidewalks, a little bit briefly into the process. In the first picture, you can see first we dug up all the bricks with a pick. In the first picture, you can see Mr. Ron Vukolich, who I want to give a special thanks to because he volunteered many hours. He lived across the street from the Reed House and volunteered to teach me how to brick and do this whole process. Let me borrow his tools and his bricks. So without him, this project wouldn't have been possible. So thank you. After we dug up the bricks, we cut out all the roots and smoothed over the dirt, covered it with stone dust to keep everything in place. And then one by one, put the bricks back. And when everything was nice and lined up, just sprinkled it with stone dust over the top and swept it in between the bricks. So nothing would be shifting side to side. And it was, you know, although it was hot some days, real humid down in Newcastle, the bugs were crazy. It was a great experience to really take an active role in history. You know, we're always at school listening to lectures and reading through books, but it was nice to really take part in the historical techniques that people would have been doing at the time, especially in the setting of the Reed House in historical Newcastle, or it's like straight out of a time machine. So it was a great experience. And then in the second part, a little bit more about the plant research. My goal was really to determine the goals and the mindset of what the owners of the house, the Coopers at the time, the second owners of the house, what they were trying to do with their garden and what were their resources based on what kind of plants they were planting. And we talked about this idea in seminar, specifically with Thomas Jefferson and the paintings and sculptures that he had at Monticello. So we learned, we talked about what can these objects and decorations say about their owners. So that gave me a lot of good ideas about what to look for when researching. I looked through historical databases from botanical gardens all over the country and all over the world. And it was definitely a learning curve, just learning where to look for these sources and what to look for. But I think I learned a lot of skills, a lot of helpful skills that I can use for later in life. And Miss Becca Duffy and Miss Tara Hayward also gave me great tips and guidance for the researching process. So thank you. The great thing about gardens is that they're ever changing. Each time I visited, I noticed something new. And this is a great thing, but it can also be difficult for the historical society because it's changing every year and even every season. It can be difficult for them to choose what to preserve, like which version throughout its history. As you can see in these pictures, it's changed a lot. In 1901, you can see it didn't have a fountain yet. The plants look lively, but in 1924, the plants are much more trimmed and a much more distinguished look. And you can see that they added brick in 1924. The Lairds did, the third owners of the house. And then in 1976, it looks a lot different. It's right after the Historical Society took over. It's a little bit overgrown. There's plantings around the fountain, and they took out the lattice structures. And today I think it looks very similar to the earliest pictures, with the grass around the fountains, the lattice structures there, and the plants are bushy but not overgrown. And I think this is a similar story that we see through a lot of parts of the gardens, is that the Historical Society is preserving a lot of the older versions of the gardens as opposed to the newer 1900s versions of the gardens. So here we can see in the back patio, in the first picture from the late 1800s, we can see large trees next to the house, and they've been taken down in the 1924 picture. And then in the 1960s, we can see all the plants away from the house have been taken out, and there are plants all along the house, ivy on the walls, dark shutters, and a canopy over the patio. And nowadays we can see they made a lot of changes since the 1960s. They took the ivy off the walls. They took the plants away from the house, even planted a big tree like there was in the 1800s. Took off the shutters. I think they're really focusing on the old versions of the house, and leaving some of the visitor services helpful to visitors, such as the canopy on a hot day. And then probably the biggest difference for the garden was that around the 1930s and 40s, the Lairds put in a big pool and pool house in the back in the park section of the garden. And when the Historical Society took over, they took all that out because of insurance. They didn't want to be charged that much. And today, all you can see is the outline of the pool in the grass. That's all that's left from that era of the garden. So that's then another example of the Historical Society going back to what it was in the late 1800s. And then a topic that we discussed a lot in seminar was the idea of losing history, or silencing history. We discussed specifically a palace in Haiti called Sanssouci, which the first king of Haiti created, and a piece of information that's not in any of the historical books in Haiti or even given on the tours of the palace is that there's actually a general that the king murdered that is also named Sanssouci. So there are many reasons why this information could be less important, why it hasn't been preserved to today. Maybe it wasn't as interesting. People didn't find it as interesting. Historians obviously can't preserve every piece of information from everybody's life. They have to pick and choose what's the most interesting. So that could be one of the reasons, or maybe because they were trying to preserve the image of the king or the image of the country even. There are many different reasons why information can be lost over time. So this idea has been really important in discussions of social issues but just applying it in a lesser way to the Reed House Gardens. The Historical Society has to pick and choose what to preserve, so that all that must come at a cost of not preserving some things. So there's really no solution to this problem, but we just have to remember the full history of the gardens through pictures and through things like the outline of the pool and the grass. Yeah. So I just want to thank the Historical Society for everything they've done. Ron, Tara, Becca, and of course, Mr. Grom. Thanks for everything, making it educational and a fun summer. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay, for that really talk. Sensitive to the connections between what we do with our hands and, and the thinking work of history. They can be so intimately related. And you were a real trooper to brave the Newcastle summers and go and work bricking in the gardens. I don't know how Dr. Vukolich does that from day to day. He's made a whole retirement project out of restoring sidewalks in Old Newcastle, and we were really grateful that we could benefit from his expertise. Fantastic. All right. Shall we move along to Al Bishop, correct?
Yep.
Okay. Who is coming from Calloway School of the Arts.
All right. So let me share my screen. Alrighty. Can everyone see that all right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. 1 second, let me just close out of this. Sorry, I don't know why this is not closing. Sorry. All right, so my name is Elle Bishop, and I am a rising senior at Calloway School of the Arts. My project was to help create social media for Delaware National History Day, and that actually inspired the title of my presentation, which is Communication, the Key to Understanding. The theme for 2021 National History Day is Communication in History, the Key to Understanding. And since my project was all about social media and creating a social media presence for Delaware National History Day, I decided to do my project by scrolling through the Instagram and kind of using that as an example of what it would look like and why it's so important. Alrighty, so communication, the key to understanding. I wanted to start off with talking about communication through history. Since the beginning of time, years ago, followed by the creation of cave paintings roughly around 40,000 years ago. Communication has always been incredibly important in society, and that has remained unchanging through time. However, as far as methods of communication are concerned, that's a very different story. As you can see in the painting shown here, on cave walls, painting was one of the first forms of communication, followed by cuneiform, which was developed in ancient Mesopotamia. And after that came the developments of pictograms in China and Egypt. And from there, many different methods of communication were developed around the globe, bringing us to today. With the invention of modern technology, the internet, and social media, we've created a whole new realm of possibilities for how we communicate with one another. A new frontier that everyone living in this generation is free to explore and take advantage of. All right, so social media's impact on communication. On August 6, 1991, the internet officially became open to the public. And with that, a whole new world of possibilities was created. On the internet, information can be spread throughout the world in only a matter of seconds. Almost anything you could ever want to know is just a quick Google search away. In 1997, the first form of social media was created. It was called 6 Degrees, and you could create a profile, send messages, and even create lists of communications or connections. After that came MySpace, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat. Social media has completely changed the way that people communicate with one another, and it has made it possible for everyone to easily share their stories with the world. The topic of sharing stories often came up in our seminars through the summer, and more specifically, how far too often our history is only shown from one side. With social media, everyone has a place where they can share their stories, and so information is becoming more accessible, and we are beginning to not just show one side of history. Social media is a great tool for sharing personal anecdotes, and through social media, we can read about other people's experiences that we might not have been able to hear about otherwise. Additionally, social media is a great way to keep up on events, politics, friends and family, as well as being a great tool for advertising and many other things. The possibilities are limitless. Changing the way we look at history. When many people think about history, they imagine museums, research libraries, and even historical reenactments. However, those things are not always accessible to everyone. Luckily, we live in a day and age where more and more things are moving online. Museums and libraries can now digitize their materials so that they're accessible to almost everyone. There are even benefits that exclusively apply to viewing museum and library text online. For instance, you can zoom in on images and text on a phone or a computer, whereas in real life, you would have to only view it straight on. There also is the benefit that you can view them from any place in the world. So if you were working remotely, you wouldn't have to worry about not having saved the images that you viewed when you went into a library or museum in person. All right, so now I'm going to talk about National History Day. Oops. There we go. This year, I was fortunate enough to participate in a competition called National History Day, or NHD for short. The program completely changed the way that I view history, and because of that, I have grown to love the subject immensely. To sum it up, National History Day is a competition where you have to create a project which is inspired by a theme that changes from year to year. Last year's theme was about breaking barriers in history. My partner and I chose to create a film about Jonestown and the People's Temple. We chose to do our project based on this because of the fact that we were both interested in the psychology behind how Jim Jones could do such an atrocious thing. And then also, we wanted to talk about the way that the People's Temple broke down barriers in regards to racism and how it was pretty much non-existent in the church. And yeah, so we thought it would apply well to the theme. Additionally, Delaware was actually where the bodies were brought in after they were found in Guyana. And we thought it was important to do something that also kind of applied to our state. My experience was incredible. My partner and I got to meet Laura Johnson Cole, a survivor of the massacre, and we got to talk to her about her life. She told us all about life within Jonestown and the People's Temple and the power dynamics and everything about life in the commune and so on. National History Day is an excellent way to get students involved and excited about history. Because the project is essentially all about something that they are interested in, not only is it a fun project, but it teaches valuable lessons about research and communication skills. Having students participate in National History Day is a great way to spark a love and interest in history, especially in adolescents who don't typically enjoy history. It's a great opportunity to show them history is just more than what you learn in school. So my project. After talking about my passion for National History Day with Ms. Faye, I was chosen to work with her to design the social media for Delaware National History Day. My project was obviously design the social media accounts for Delaware National History Day. I designed templates that can be filled in with information for posts, made a social media policy, and came up with ideas for content. In addition to providing resources that students can use during their National History Days preparations, the social media is about getting the students involved in National History Day by showing them how interesting and enriching the experience truly is. My goal for this project was to make the social media appealing to everyone so that they might be curious about the project and then be interested in competing. So developing the aesthetic. One of the first things I did in the process of designing social media was to pick out the color scheme. Since National History Day is all about American history, I chose to base the colors for the theme off of the American flag, and I chose the fonts by matching that kind of modern flair with the colors and everything else. So the font that I'm showing on the screen right now is what is used for the titles on the posts, and then this font is used for the detailing. All right, so making the templates. I knew when I began to design the templates, I wanted them to be minimalistic and easy to read. as well as easy for other people to work with. So down the line, if someone needs to edit them, it's quick and simple. So for these reasons, I made simple templates with small accents to add a little spice, so to speak. And then here are two of the templates. I filled them out to show kind of an example of what the post would look like. So this one is just about information about a National History Day theme workshop. And this one here is showing the research library and their hours of operation and days, because that's an excellent tool for students when they're doing their project. There's tons of stuff that's super accessible at the library. So yeah. And then, so the fellowship. The program was everything I could have hoped for and more. I gained so much experience during the course of my fellowship, and I am so grateful to have had this opportunity. Although I previously had experience working with the Adobe Suite, I feel a certain level of mastery now, and that is a skill that I will use for the rest of my life. Even though we didn't have much time spent in person, this program was definitely one that I'm so thankful to have been a part of. The discourse that we had during seminars was very interesting, and all the literature that we discussed was it was very challenging to my reading skills, but the payoff from having to interpret that was unmatched. I just want to take a moment to thank Ms. Fay, Siri, Mr. Grom, and everyone who helped make the fellowship possible, as well as the other fellows for helping to engage in meaningful and productive conversation during our seminars. So thank you.
Thank you, Al. What important work that is going to translate, I think, into some direct benefit, some direct traction for one of our signature programs here at DHS, National History Day in Delaware. So this is not the last we're going to hear from Elle, because now all of her summer's work is going to start getting, fed out into the world. So that's really exciting. Kudos to you. All right, so we have, we're down to our last two fellows. The first of those is Ben Greenberg, who's at the Hill School and has been working for the Reed House.
Hello. Oh, there we go. So I've been working in the research library with Mr. Grom, and I've been scanning documents, and I've been sending things to our graduate assistant, Ryan. And so here's just two examples of what I've been working with. On the right is an onion skin paper, and they're just very delicate and light. And then on the left is just something that's pretty much the complete opposite. It was in one of the Boothurst collections. We had a big book with sketches in the Reed House, for the Reed House of the interior design. And we were just unable to scan it. So I had to take pictures, and I just wanted to show the difference of materials that I was working with. But I've been working with Ryan and Mr. Grom on planning outdoor tour offerings at the Reed House while the HVAC system is being upgraded. It would be an opportunity to focus more on Philip and Lydia Laird, who purchased the Reed House in 1920, and how they were a part of the Newcastle preservation movement. The Lairds owned multiple properties in the surrounding area, most of which were transformed in some way. The architect, Lausset Rogers, had worked on some of the restoration on Newcastle buildings and was also responsible for designing tap rooms at the Reed House. In the mid-1930s, Daniel Moore Bates also became interested with this project and began the initiative to transform all of Newcastle to a destination for historical tourism. Bates and others were in close contact with the creators of Colonial Williamsburg in the process. Our goal in connecting the Reed House to the neighborhood beyond is to show the people the intentionality and how all of these historic streets look today. In some ways, the Lairds, Bates, and Rogers were saving historic buildings. In other ways, they were creating something more like the basement tap room, a plaything based on imagination. While these creators were attempting to restore Newcastle and attempted to be as precise as possible, they were not as thoughtful with including diversity in the process. The creatives were mainly focused on just the white perspective rather than everyone's perspective, which is unfair and shows bias in their work. This lack of imagination in the restoration process allows current historians to imagine a more diverse culture in Old Newcastle today, and now presents us with an opportunity to do so. One where people of different identities can claim ownership of part of the town. I've learned my reading comprehension skills, just as the other fellows have touched on, especially from the seminar, they've improved dramatically. And I've just noticed that throughout the seminars as we kept going, I was just finding things that before I don't think I would be able to spot. And I think that will be able to benefit me beyond in other historical work that I may do. I think it also helped broaden my perspective on certain topics, especially when we were talking on the seminar, just listening to everybody else's views and what they have to say, and then just kind of taking what we can from it. And I think that the seminars were definitely very helpful for all of us. And I also think that this is a very unique experience that I've never been able to be a part of. I remember my first day walking down, just as I was bringing up the boxes, just being shocked with how many things just have not been documented. That's part of what I was scanning. While I was scanning, just so Ryan could help work with the new information, and we could gather as much information as possible. And overall, I think that this has been a great experience for me because not many kids my age are able to work in a workplace environment like this. This is Emily Bodie. She's a fashion designer, and we touched on the pieces in the seminar. So her circus fashion, well, she used only ribbons awarded to horses in the 1970s, but she was going for kind of the circus fashion look. She had a connection to the circus as her grandfather's great-great-uncle Albert was president of the Bodie Wagon Company, and they would perform circus acts. She also loved going as a kid and still goes today, and she said that was her big inspiration. And the reason I just chose to talk about Emily Bodie specifically was because Bodie connected her past and people who were involved in her past, and made it into almost an art form, really. And I think that that's kind of what the creators of Old Newcastle and the people who helped design it did in their own way. And I think by leaving us with the opportunity to imagine a more diverse culture, they also have given us that as well. And I think that this has been a great experience. And I know my grandmother was a previous president of the Delaware Historical Society, so I've always had a bit of a connection, but nothing like this. And I think I would love to definitely do more with the Historical Society in the future, and this was a great new look. Yeah, here's the overall comparison. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. You took everybody for a sharp left turn when you put Emily Bodie's Paris circus collection on the screen. But again, as Dr. Young warned everyone, there might be some surprises and some challenging of expectations. So thank you for threading together these very interesting and seemingly disparate thoughts. I realized too that I had omitted someone important to us in my thanks earlier, and that would be Ryan Bachman, who was a PhD student at the University of Delaware, a former graduate assistant at the Reed House, and he's been under contract this summer to really pull together research on this topic. So Ben has been helping Ryan with that process. Ryan's been really remote in Virginia, and Rebecca Duffy, the education coordinator for the Reed House, is ultimately taking what Ben and Ryan have funneled to them and turning this into actual sort of outdoor tour elements that we will be able to roll out for members of the public this fall. And it really, we look forward to being able to do something again after we've been in a very slow pattern during the pandemic. So thank you, Ben, for your really important help in facilitating that. Okay, I think we are all the way down to Maura Smeater, who's been working for the research library and is also a rising senior at Archmere Academy. Maura, you want to take it over and tell us a little more about yourself and your work?
Yeah, definitely. Okay, I'm going to share my screen now. All right. There we go. So as Mr. Grom said, my name is Maura Smeater. This summer I've been working with the research library on a transcription project. So specifically, I've gotten to work with an 1865 diary as well as a series of letters that Edward Bringhurst Jr. had written. He was going on a journey down to the South after the Civil War to retrieve his dead brother-in-law's body. So he was documenting on a day-to-day basis what he was doing. So this is A Quaker Goes to Richmond. So on the right, as I said, you have Edward Bringhurst Jr. So he was a prominent and devout Quaker in the area. He was very involved in the business happenings of Wilmington. So he was an investor in coal and railroad companies. He was a large part of the early stages of WSFS. He was very involved. And so he married Anna James Webb, who was also a prominent Quaker in the area, in 1862. So that's kind of where Richard came in. Richard was Anna's brother. He was a member of the 4th Regiment of the Delaware Volunteers. So he fought for the Union. He was stationed down in Virginia. He fought in the Battle of Bethesda Church, and he ended up dying on June 2nd, of 1864. So he was hastily buried behind the lines in 1864, as I said. So Edward was coming up going down in 1865 with an acquaintance, Sam Grubb, when he was about 30, to go retrieve Richard's body to bury in Wilmington. So as you can see in the middle, there's a picture of them. That's from the UD library. Now, some historical context for the diary. So on April 2nd, Richmond fell to the Union. On April 9th, you have Appomattox. April 15th, Lincoln is shot. So Edward showing up about a month and change later on May 17th of 1865. So while the Civil War was over, it was still pretty fresh in the landscape of the country at the time. So for some orientation as far as location, he was actually living at the Rockwood Estate in Wilmington. So his mother was a Shipley. He actually inherited the estate from his great uncle. So he was living in Wilmington. He ended up having to travel to Baltimore to catch a steamer. He took the steamer Louisiana from Baltimore to Fort Monroe. Now, Fort Monroe was kind of his home base during his time in Virginia. From there, he was able to easily use the James River to get to Norfolk, Richmond, pretty much everywhere he needed to go. And as you can see there, Cold Harbor was his end goal, his destination. All right, so the story. As far as the transcription process, the diary took me about a week to kind of go all the way through. The letters took about the same amount of time. Those letters in that diary are located in the Webb family papers in the Delaware Historical Society's archives. And so here's a little breakdown of what the journey looked like for Edward. So on the 17th, he's traveling from Wilmington to Baltimore, as I said, and the majority of that day is spent on the steamer just getting down to Virginia. So the morning of the 18th, he actually arrives at Fort Monroe. He's getting a little tour, he's settling in. He goes to Norfolk for dinner that night. He's having a pretty good time. And then on the 19th, he's deciding he's going to go to Richmond. So he drives up to Hampton really quick just to check it out. You know, his friend takes him. And then he's taking the James River all the way up to Richmond. He's seeing ironclads and the Dutch Gap Canal, which she details. And then on the 20th, he's touring Richmond. So he's hitting all these iconic spots, you know, the Tredegar Ironworks, Libby Prison, Castle Thunder, the Confederate Capitol, you know, all these really cool spots in Richmond at the time. And then on the 21st, he kind of shifts more to business in Richmond. So he's looking for an undertaker that will ship Richard's body back up to Wilmington once he obtains it. Though, unfortunately for Edward, this is kind of where his problems start, because it actually starts raining. So from the night of the 21st into the 22nd, it's just pouring, it's thunder, it's lightning, and that he has to delay his trip to Cold Harbor. So the 22nd, he's kind of camped out in Richmond waiting to see what's going to happen. Now, the skies open up and it stops raining. On the 23rd, they head out. They think they're going to be good, but they get to where they're supposed to cross a pontoon bridge, and it had been completely wiped out by the rain the night before. So they kind of hunker down in Petersburg the end of that day into the 24th, seeing what they're going to do. They head back to Richmond. They're thinking maybe they can catch an omnibus to Cold Harbor, but it starts raining again. So they're stuck in Richmond, and then on the 26th, they unfortunately decide to go home, bitterly disappointed and unsuccessful. Now, this trip was where he was keeping that diary and he was writing those letters to his wife that I was able to work with, though we do have a telegram from June 4th saying that he had gotten Richard's body and had arrived at Fort Monroe. So he must have taken a second journey, which was successful, but he just didn't document it as well as his first, unfortunately for me. All right, and so as you can see here on the right, you've got Fort Monroe kind of jutting out right into the Virginia Bay area, and then you've got Hampton up top. And then as far as Richmond, you can see on the bank of the James River on the right, you have Libby Prison and Castle Thunder right next to each other. And then in the city of Richmond, you have the Confederate Capitol. So just a little bit of location there. Now, as far as the transcription process, obviously through that, I was able to piece together the plot, kind of what was going on as far as his journey. But the outside research that I ended up kind of clinging to was actually finding photographs. So lucky for me, the Library of Congress has a huge digitized collection of Civil War negatives and photographs. And what was really important was, as I said, Richmond had fallen about a month before Edward was showing up in Virginia, and because of that, you had all these photographers and all these media people flooding into the Confederate Capitol to document its fall. So all these pictures are pretty much from April. They're about a month before he showed up, but there's a lot of really cool details I was able to find. For example, that picture right there that you can see is actually the Hygeia Dining Saloon at Fort Monroe. So he had breakfast here one day. So I was just finding those really little, kind of connections that I think make the transcription come alive and really make a more robust narrative. Also, they add a very interesting layer. As you can see, kind of highlighted on the left is the page of the diary, and on the right is my transcription. He's seeing the 15-inch guns when he's getting a tour at Fort Monroe. And just reading that, it doesn't have much of an impact. But as soon as you see a picture of this gun, this is the 15-inch gun at Fort Monroe, and you can see, the proportion. You've got the guy standing on the left, you've got the ships in the background, and it just really, adds something that I think makes it very interesting. You're seeing what he saw at the time. And then here's another passage that was particularly dense with cool photographs. And I'll take this opportunity to quickly mention some of the struggles I had. His handwriting was pretty good, and I clicked with it pretty, well, but I did have trouble with some of his capitalizations. He's kind of all over the place in that aspect, and some of his B's and some of his I's. For example, if you can see at the bottom right, the word band took me about 45 minutes to get. I looked at that word for 45 minutes before I finally got it. And then, lucky enough for me, there is the band on the right. So just finding that connections is something I latched onto, and I think that really adds something to the transcription. You can see he also mentions the 3rd Pennsylvania Artillery marching at Fort Monroe. And there's the 3rd Pennsylvania Artillery on the left, and there they are marching on the right. So that was a large part of my project. And so the transition. For a large portion of my summer, I was looking at the diary through scans that my grade advisors, Ms. Reifenberg and Mr. Robinson, did for me. And while this is really cool because I got to zoom in and see really tiny details, and I was able to make this presentation pretty seamlessly, it's just I was missing out on the material, diary. I was missing out on interacting with the paper and the leather. So I finally was able to go into the library, luckily, all masked up and everything, and I got to finally see it. And so it had built up for me. I had this huge character of Edward Bringhurst in my head. I was so invested in his journey, and it kind of all boiled down to this somewhat ugly, nasty old pocket diary. And if you saw that in a thrift store, it's not like you're going to pick it up or anything, but to me it was my whole summer. And so just holding this 155-year-old document that I knew back to back almost was just a mind-blowing experience for me. And something else that was really neat was I was, shuffling through papers, and I was shuffling through the diary, and this little scrap of paper fell out. And I read it. It said, "Dear Annie, enclosed, please find a Confederate bug. Can you please tell us the species? I found it under the covers at the Spotswood Hotel." And, immediately my wheels start turning, where is this? And I knew exactly where it was. So Edward had written a letter to his wife on May 19th of 1865 saying that his friend Sam Grubb that he was on the journey with had found a big bed bug in their room at the Spotswood Hotel. So just the feeling that this gross old bed bug from 1865 was from room 8, which was a corner room that had no lock on the door because it was broken, from the Spotswood Hotel in Richmond, Virginia, from May 19th of 1865. And maybe I was the first person to see it since Mrs. Bringhurst herself. Just that experience was so cool. A little disgusting, I'll have it, but it was a really neat experience. And then going outside and kind of examining Bringhurst as a narrator. So his obituary described him as a man of kindly disposition, fine sense of honor, and a quaint wit that made him most excellent company. But obviously, when you're interacting with something as personal, as a diary or his letters to his wife, you gain a whole another level of understanding of the idiosyncrasies he has as a person and his bias as, again, a person. So on the left, you have Rockwood. So this is where he was living in Wilmington. And then on the right, you have the village of Hampton, which was the trashed village he visited. So just, understanding that he's eating ice cream in Richmond, and he's getting steamed around by all of his affluent friends to Norfolk and Portsmouth. He's really living the life that not only could people not imagine at that time, but people just couldn't fathom it, and so understanding that, he was extremely wealthy. And also the fact the only reason I'm interacting with it, 155 years later, is because he did have the opportunity to be educated, and he was literate, and he had the financial means and the time to keep a diary and write and send letters to his wife. So just having that, going through it as a researcher myself in this instance, having that as an underlying, aspect was definitely important to evaluate it honestly. And then as far as his descriptions of Richmond and Petersburg and Fort Monroe and Virginia in general, he actually withholds most of his opinions, whether it be political sympathies or his view regarding the war. But based on his few and far between descriptions, I believe that he viewed the war mainly as unfortunate destruction. He was a Quaker, so I can't imagine that he was a big fan of war. He probably, considering what he was saying about it, he probably just thought it was completely a shame that, such tragedy had happened to the country. And so here you can see this is a description of the Hare House in Petersburg, and he's focusing on, the destruction as far as the landscape and the shrubs and the trees. And while this is very emotional, you can also see that, the war must not have affected him that much. He doesn't have a strong opinion, and he doesn't have great emotion on the subject matter because, he was living up in the North. He had, butt tons of money, to be honest. And, his brother-in-law died, but other than that, maybe he just wasn't interacting with that much, and therefore he didn't have a great opinion. So just understanding that. And then this particular passage, when he was talking about Castle Thunder, I found very interesting. Now, I doubt that, Edward Bringhurst Jr. was writing his diary thinking that 155 years later, a high school senior was going to go and analyze his word choice, but I'm going to do that. So he chooses to say that Castle Thunder was a vile place to confine prisoners. And I find his use of the word prisoners very interesting because, throughout the diary, he does refer to our Union men, our boys and those Rebs. He's very, he has two different sides. But here he just boils it down to just people. It was a terrible place to house humans. So while his view is somewhat dispassionate, one could say, I think it also focuses on the terribly human aspects of the war, and he sympathizes with that very subtly. So while I wrap up, these are some of my favorite quotes from out the diary and the letters if you want to take a look at that. But obviously through this experience, the transcription unlocked the immediate narrative. I understood what his journey looked like. But what was most appealing to me was kind of meeting the man and understanding who Edward Bringhurst was as a person. History presents such a unique opportunity to, become invested in a journey, long over, or long completed, and so familiar with a person, long dead, and understanding that, Edward Bringhurst loved oranges. He would buy oranges wherever he could. And, he loved to update his wife on what he was eating and, how he felt. He was really homesick all the time. His friend Sam Grubb, he was always worried about his levels of anxiety regarding the journey. He would ship his wife flowers. He had a personality. He had a person. And I think that, this was just such an interesting opportunity and such a unique one to kind of meet a man long dead. And he's not a household name, but, for my household, he became a name. He was a dinner time conversation. So just interacting with history on such a personal level was such a lovely opportunity. And I'm so happy that I got to, be in contact and have Miss Reifenberg and Mr. Robinson guide me along the journey and help me do something that I found so cool. So thanks for the photographs as far as the Library of Congress, the University of Delaware, and the Delaware Historical Society. So, thank you.
Mara, I think you were born for this project.
Yes, I'm very excited. I'm just going to add something, but hopefully in the spring I'm taking a research class, so hopefully I'll be able to continue it, fall greater into the rabbit hole that was Mr. Bringhurst's diary. So thank you all for your time.
Precisely. Mara, have you visited Rockwood? Have you been to Rockwood before?
Yes, actually, after our last seminar, I had to do a little bit of brainstorming. I had to revise my project a little bit. So I took my dog, we went on a walk, did some nice, we looked at the landscape. I actually found some rose bushes. I don't know if they're the same rose bushes he sent to his wife, but I'd like to think so. So yeah, I have visited.
Good, yeah. And we have to get you on the inside of the house one day too. Yeah. Extraordinary. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you everyone. I mean, what an impressive group once again. Fascinating projects, fascinating talks. So a virtual round of applause. Look at all the clapping. So we have a little bit of time if there are questions that folks would like to ask, and you can either ask it through chat, or you're welcome to unmute yourselves and ask questions of any of the fellows. I'm just scanning to see whether anything has come in. There was a note from Jim Meek asking Mara whether you were aware that George Reed III, son of the guy who built the Reed House, I'm sorry, I've said this the wrong way. Jim says, did you know about the George Reed III daughter who lived in Fort Monroe prior to the war?
I did not, but well, I guess Delaware's always been small, so I can imagine that it probably ran into.
Can I say something?
Please.
So George Reed had a number of daughters. I keep getting them confused. I think this is the third because it then involved George Reed IV and the property down in the South. Well, George Reed III's, whichever's daughter, 5 daughters, some married West Point grads and went north. Some married West Point grads and went south. There was a total difference. And you read some interesting attitudes towards blacks in her diary. He wrote a diary which has been preserved and transcribed. And she went down and she describes her early life where she loved being at Fort Monroe. So I wonder if you at some point get a chance to go down there, and it still is around, you to look at some of the places. If Brenton will give me your email address, I'll send you the transcription of these diaries.
Yeah, I'd love that. Thank you so much.
To all of you, congratulations and well done. It's been a great evening along the way. So I'd also ask you a question, which is sort of how would you promote this to your peers? How do we make sure everybody at least knows that it exists and that there's a possibility that they could be involved?
I would say just like it's such a hands-on experience. I wasn't really expecting it to be this hands-on, especially virtual, and I was pretty lucky with my project. But just being able to actually like handle all of the historical documents and scanning them and reading them, just overall, like I've never had an experience like it, and it was, yeah, it was just so unique to anything else I've ever done.
I would say, as far as letting other people know that the program is like here, I found out from my teacher, and I think that if maybe you could send it, like, I don't know if there's a way to send like a mass email, like alerting all of the like history teachers in Delaware and I guess maybe the tri-state area that this is a program that's exists, and it's great, and it's a great opportunity for students to have, as Ben said, a hands-on look at history. I think that's how that'd be a good way to get the word out, because like I said, that's how I heard about it. So
I would look at it, if I were to advertise it to my friends or even just in a poster, I would most likely probably talk about how the divisions of history that the DHS uses, and then kind of like the structure of the internship as a whole, because I really think that I really liked how the internship really talked about all aspects of history and went in depth in a lot of various topics. And that's definitely something that I would mention to my friends to get them interested into doing this program.
And you all may have already done this. I was called away for a minute. If you haven't, I hope there's a way for you to give this same presentation, each of you, to not just your classmates, but your entire school, including all of the faculty, all of the parents, all of the guidance counselors. Wish I'd had it when I was your age in school. I mean, really, our audience is sitting here knowing that we're talking to high school kids. You all really dove into your subject matter and your projects beautifully. Can I come get an internship?
Let's work on that.
I keep threatening to be one of the interns one summer.
I want to come with him. I'll be the intern's intern. Really, you all, I cannot say enough about your presentations and your work. Really fantastic. And David and Stephanie, thank you for putting this evening together. I love the Historical Society.
Thank you so much for joining us. And we're going to have to start requiring photos with the applications, because then we can screen out the, the suspicious glasses and mustaches, because it's actually Harry.
If I may ask a question of all the fellows, in one word or two, what surprised you the most about this experience?
I would say flexibility, because I came into this internship expecting not what I got, but I got something even better. I was given a project that was tailored to my personal interests in technology and in joining technology and history. And even as the project progressed, we ran into problems, we ran into roadblocks, and Mr. Grom was willing to work with me on everything. And it's just a very flexible program in the best way possible.
Yeah, along with Molly, I would say helpfulness. That surprised me the most. When I heard, it was going to be a virtual internship, it's sometimes hard to get help and like it's a lot of individual work at your house, not with anybody else. But the historical society staff was so great. They all helped me out and made sure I was doing fine with my project. So that was a nice surprise.
Kind of going off of what Molly and what Sanjay just said, I would say surprising, because when I like received from Miss Faye when I like learned what I was doing, it was not what I expected at all, and in the best way. Like I was coming into it kind of thinking like maybe I'd be doing photography or maybe like organizing something in the museum, but what I got was so much more, and it was like exactly what Molly said, like so tailored to what I'm passionate about and what I want to do in life. And it was so great and such a unique experience in the way that it really did fit my needs. But I felt as though, and I feel as though I brought a lot to the table and significantly helped with the social media and had a really positive impact on that kind of thing.
Say for me, it's probably like diversity, just like how different all of our projects were. Sanjay was settling the bricks. I was scanning. Mara was transcribing. Transcripting. Molly set up the website. Elle with the social media, and then Sean with MLK and everything. I just think I was just shocked at how diverse everything, like the diversity in the project.
I would probably like describe it as consuming in the best way possible. I really just became kind of entranced with my project, and it kind of took over my life for a period, but I was completely fine with that. So just the opportunity, you know, as a high schooler to interact with, you know, what you love to do this closely, in such a unique experience as far as working with people that know so much. It was definitely awesome.
I would use the words learning and expression. Learning first, because through this internship, I was able to read a lot of different articles and texts, and I learned so much new information, and I realized so much information that I didn't even know existed, especially regarding history and even history in Delaware with the August Quarterly and MLK Day. There's so much dense history that I learned, and then also expression, because in my task I was able to develop activities that related to all the themes that happened within one of the largest struggle periods for African American communities. So I had a lot of expression in that way, and I could use a lot of creativity to develop activities that I thought would interest all ages of communities.
Thank you. Those are wonderful responses. Discovery, expressiveness, flexibility, diversity, wonder, love, all consuming. You've basically summed up why we put our feet on the floor in the mornings to work in historic resources and in historic preservation. You've shown how creative this work is. And I want to thank all of the 2020 Baetjer Fellows very much.
Any questions for the panel before we spring them from the hot seats?
I have one question I was hoping to ask, and that is if any of you learned anything new about yourself when you were doing this project?
I mean, I guess just like just persevering when and also knowing when to just take a break, like kind of knowing there's a line in between. Because if I got stuck on something, sometimes I would try to push through and then it would not work out so well. So I would just need to take a quick 5-minute break and just reset. So I guess I think I could use that in my day-to-day more, just to avoid getting frustrated with things. Just taking a quick step back, taking a deep breath, and then working from there.
I assume that all of you fellows have your own Twitter feeds. Is that correct? So are you tweeting out about your experience on this? Or will you be now? If it was positive. Okay, we're going to do some research ourselves and determine collectively how many followers you all have. We expect to see it explode exponentially after tonight.
Excellent. Well, look, this is 2020 and there's no shame in this. If anybody is doing interesting things with social media on whatever platform and you would like to put your username into the chat, please do that. And for that, as long as we're on the subject, I am going to put in the DHS Instagram accounts, and let's see, Stephanie, you're going to have to help me remember exactly what the Mitchell Center Twitter handle is. But these are definitely—
I'll drop it in the chat.
Excellent. So Delaware History Vault is coming to collections, and you'll see all kinds of fantastic stuff that folks in our curatorial department dig out. Of course, the main account for the society is, let me get this right. It's Delaware Historical Society, right? Sometimes the things you know best are the things you forget. Yes, Delaware Historical Society. And the Reed House has an Instagram at Reed House and Gardens. And the Mitchell Center Facebook also. Reed House and Gardens doubles for Facebook, same username. So as long as we're on the topic of people's social media blowing up, let's blow up the DHS social media with followers. We have a moment or two if there are other questions or other final thoughts from the fellows. I just wanted to drop in that this has been such a great experience, doing this via Zoom. Reading the chat along the way there's been such a flood of positive response that we wouldn't have thought of doing 6 months ago, sitting on our hands, listening in a room. So this has been a really special evening for me, and I hope that it has been for fellows and others as well. It's really wonderful to be able to make this connection. Well, I'm hearing a silence, so maybe that means that we've been at this long. Why don't we all say goodbye? Congratulations to the fellows. Good luck to the former fellows who are off to undertakings.
Congratulations to all of you, the staff as well. It's been, the kids have been talking about the flexibility. Well, the flexibility comes from the people who are running the program. So to all of you, well done, and best of luck to all of the fellows, and past and present. I'm glad to see Tom and Jesse and some of the others along the way. So well done and congratulations, and hopefully there'll be many more Baetjer Fellows in the years to come.
I hope so. It's great.
It was a very informative and interesting presentation from everyone, and thank you for doing this, and we're very glad that we joined you tonight.
So are we. Thank you.
Thank you. It's excellent. I hope you all love our state. Got a good introduction to it.
Small wonder, big history.
Yeah, it's great. Congratulations. You all did a terrific job.
Thanks so much, Brent and Grom, for your coordination of this on behalf of the whole DHS community and the state of Delaware, bringing the young people into the work and into the life of the region.
Yes.